it chapter by chapter, one bite at a time. So many adventures and mountains we can climb. Take it word for word, line by line, one bite at a time.
Welcome to Bite at a Time Books, where we read you your favorite classics one bite at a time. My name is Brie Carlisle, and I love to read, and wanted to share my passion with listeners like you. If you want to know what's coming next and vote on upcoming books, sign up for our newsletter at biteatatimebooks.com. You'll also find our new t-shirts in the shop, including podcast shirts and quote shirts from your favorite classic novels. Be sure to follow my show on your favorite podcast platform so you get all the new episodes. You can find most of our links in the show notes. But also our website, biteatatimebooks.com, includes all of the links for our show, including to our Patreon to support the show, and YouTube, where we have special behind the narration of the episodes. We're part of the Bite at a Time Books Productions Network. If you'd also like to hear what inspired your favorite classic authors to write their novels, and what was going on in the world at the time, check out the Bite at a Time Books Behind the Story podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. Please note, while we try to keep the text as close to the original as possible, some words have been changed to honor the marginalized communities who've identified the words as harmful, and to stay in alignment with Bite at a Time Books' brand values. Today we'll be continuing Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. Chapter 4. End of the Brigand. The conclusion of Marius's classical studies coincided with Monsieur Gillenormand's departure from society. The old man bade farewell to the Faubourg Saint-Germain and to Madame d'Étier's salon, and established himself in the Marais, in his house of the Rue des Flots du Calvaire. There he had for servants, in addition to the porter, that chambermaid Nicolette, who had succeeded to Magnon, and that short-breathed and pursy Basque, who have been mentioned above. In 1827, Marius had just attained his 17th year. One evening, on his return home, he saw his grandfather holding a letter in his hand. "Marius," said Monsieur Gillenormand, "you will set out for Vernon tomorrow." "Why?" said Marius. "To see your father." Marius was seized with a trembling fit. He had thought of everything except this, that he should one day be called upon to see his father. Nothing could be more unexpected, more surprising, and, let us admit it, more disagreeable to him. It was forcing estrangement into reconciliation. It was not an affliction, but it was an unpleasant duty. Marius, in addition to his motives of political antipathy, was convinced that his father, the slasher, as Monsieur Gillenormand called him on his amiable days, did not love him. This was evident, since he had abandoned him to others. Feeling that he was not beloved, he did not love. "Nothing is more simple," he said to himself. He was so astounded that he did not question Monsieur Gillenormand. The grandfather resumed. "It appears that he is ill. He demands your presence." And after a pause, he added, "Set out tomorrow morning. I think there's a coach which leaves the Cour des Fontaines at 6 o'clock, and which arrives in the evening. Take it. He says that here is haste." Then he crushed the letter in his hand and thrust it into his pocket. Marius might have set out that very evening, and have been with his father on the following morning. A diligence from the Rue de Balue took the trip to Rouen by night at that date, and passed through Vernon. Neither Marius nor Monsieur Gillenormand thought of making inquiries about it. The next day at twilight, Marius reached Vernon. People were just beginning to light their candles. He asked the first person whom he met for Monsieur Pontmercy's house, for in his own mind he agreed with the restoration, and like it, did not recognize his father's claim to the title of either colonel or baron. The house was pointed out to him. He rang. A woman with a little lamp in her hand opened the door. "Monsieur Pontmercy," said Marius. The woman remained motionless. "Is this his house?" demanded Marius. The woman nodded affirmatively. "Can I speak with him?" The woman shook her head. "But I'm his son," persisted Marius. "He's expecting me." "He no longer expects you," said the woman. Then he perceived that she was weeping. She pointed to the door of a room on the ground floor. He entered. In that room, which was lighted by a tallow candle standing on the chimney-piece, there were 3 men. One standing erect, another kneeling, and one lying at full length on the floor in his shirt. The one on the floor was the colonel. The other 2 were the doctor and the priest who was engaged in prayer. The colonel had been attacked by brain fever 3 days previously. As he had a foreboding of evil at the very beginning of his illness, he had written to Monsieur Gillenormand to demand his son. The malady had grown worse. On the very evening of Marius's arrival at Vernon, the colonel had had an attack of delirium. He had risen from his bed in spite of the servants' efforts to prevent him, crying, "My son is not coming, I shall go to meet him." And he ran out of his room and fell prostrate on the floor of the antechamber. He had just expired. The doctor had been summoned, and the curé. The doctor had arrived too late. The son had also arrived too late. By the dim light of the candle, a large tear could be distinguished on the pale and prostrate colonel's cheek, where it had trickled from his dead eye. The eye was extinguished, but the tear was not yet dry. That tear was his son's delay. Marius gazed upon that man whom he beheld for the first time, on that venerable and manly face, on those open eyes which saw not, on those white locks, those robust limbs, on which, here and there, brown lines marking sword thrusts and a sort of red stars, which indicated bullet holes were visible. He contemplated that gigantic sear which stamped heroism on that countenance upon which God had imprinted goodness. He reflected that this man was his father, and that this man was dead, and a chill ran over him. The sorrow which he felt was the sorrow which he would have felt in the presence of any other man whom he had chanced to behold stretched out in death. Anguish, poignant anguish, was in that chamber. The servant woman was lamenting in a corner. The curé was praying, and his sobs were audible. The doctor was wiping his eyes. The corpse itself was weeping. The doctor, the priest, and the woman gazed at Marius in the midst of their affliction without uttering a word. He was a stranger there. Marius, who was far too little affected, felt ashamed and embarrassed at his own attitude. He held his hat in his hand, and he dropped it on the floor, in order to produce the impression that grief had deprived him of the strength to hold it. At the same time, he experienced remorse, and he despised himself for behaving in this manner. But was it his fault? He did not love his father. Why should he? The colonel had left nothing. The sale of big furniture barely paid the expenses of his burial. The servant found a scrap of paper which she handed to Marius. It contained the following in the colonel's handwriting. "For my son. The Emperor made me a baron on the battlefield of Waterloo. Since the Restoration disputes my right to this title, which I purchased with my blood, my son shall take it and bear it. That he will be worthy of it is a matter of course." Below, the colonel had added, "At that same battle of Waterloo, a sergeant saved my life. The man's name was Thénardier. I think that he has recently been keeping a little inn in a village in the neighborhood of Paris, at Chez or Montfermeil. If my son meets him, he will do all the good he can to Thénardier." Marius took this paper and preserved it, not out of duty to his father, but because of that vague respect for death which is always imperious in the heart of man. Nothing remained of the colonel. Monsieur Gillenormand had his sword and uniform sold to an old clothes dealer. The neighbors devastated the garden and pillaged the rare flowers. The other plants turned to nettles and weeds, and died. Marius remained only 48 hours at Vernon. After the interment, he returned to Paris, and applied himself again to his law studies, with no more thought of his father than if the latter had never lived. In 2 days, the colonel was buried. And in 3, forgotten. Marius wore crepe on his cap. That was all. Thank you for joining Bite at a Time Books today, while we read a bite of one of your favorite classics. Again, my name is Brie Carlisle, and I hope you come back tomorrow for the next bite of Les Miserables. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at biteatatimebooks.com and check out the shop. You can check out the show notes or our website, biteatatimebooks.com, for the rest of the links for our show. We'd love to hear from you on social media as well.